Hi everyone, it's Ash from FPL Hints, here to talk about Euro Fantasy Match Day 7. For this video, we'll do a quick review of the semi-final games, a reminder of my hypothetical team and how it did in the semis, also a quick reminder of the transfer rules for Match Day 7. We'll preview the final, and I'll also mention what transfers I would make with my hypothetical team. But before I get into it, I'd like to say a big thanks to the tens of thousands that have tuned into my UCL Fantasy and Euro Fantasy content this season. I was genuinely taken aback at the dedication that fantasy football managers have given to both games, and it's my intention to carry on producing UCL fantasy content next season. So as always, if you're able to like, share and subscribe, that would be greatly appreciated. So let's get into it, straight into the matches for the semi-finals. So Spain against France, clearly Spain were the favourites for this game, and France, to be perfectly frank with you, haven't had the best of tournaments, and they really had to turn it up a notch against Spain in the semi-finals, and of course got that early goal. But clearly, after that sensational strike from Yamal, and then Dani Olmo scoring straight afterwards, the tide had already turned. And of course, that wasn't the end of it for France. They put up a fight in the match later on. Of course, had attacking subs as the match progressed as well, but from their side, it wasn't to be. But arguably, like the best team won on the day without a doubt, and Spain have been, like compared to all the other premium teams, the one team that has consistently performed in each of the matches at the Euros. So fair play to them. And with France, like clearly this was not Mbappe's best tournament at all. Of course, he had the injury, and that might have hindered him to some extent as well. Recall him missing a group stage altogether as well. But the lack of goals for this France team was telling throughout the whole tournament. And of course, we've moaned and complained about how England have done in the tournament before the semi-finals, but wasn't the best for France. And who knows what France team will turn up at the World Cup in 2 years' time. But clearly, they need a massive improvement if they're going to be the same France team that got to the final in 2022, and of course the France team that won in 2018. And can they really rely on Mbappe alone once again? We saw what happened with Portugal and Ronaldo, how they're so reliant on that one player, and then the rest is history, as they say. But no doubt France will fine tune their team, and of course, some of the elderly statesmen, as it were, like Giroud, will no doubt won't appear in that tournament. But it is what it is for France. From performance alone, we've seen like better like French teams over the past few years. So on to the Netherlands and England. Massive semi-final for both nations. Of course, the Netherlands won the Euros in 1988, and England famously have never won the Euros. And big match, especially with England having got to the Euro finals 3 years ago and having not won, of course, famously any major title since 1966. And the question was, what kind of England were we going to see? Were we going to see the cagey England that we saw against Slovakia, Slovenia, and Switzerland, or a team that was going to show a bit more fight? And thankfully, despite conceding early on, I think that was a blessing in disguise for England fans, because it meant that England were on the back foot and they really had to be at the races from the get-go. And thankfully, it was an early goal that they conceded as well. And that period from when Kane scored the penalty, and albeit it was a very problematic penalty, you could say that referees maybe 90 times out of 100 may not have even given it as a penalty, but it is what it is. England have had many dodgy calls going against them over the years, so I'll take it, to be perfectly frank with you. So then that period opened up where they scored the penalty and they didn't retreat. They showed like a lot of progressive play, especially Foden. I'd argue that in tournament football, it's probably one of his best ever games in an England shirt, if not the best. So from that standpoint, there was that momentum. And of course, the Netherlands seemed to have come back later on. and at the start of the second half. So they weren't really out of it. And then there was a bit of a lull in the match as well. But then ultimately, to Southgate's credit, it was those brave and game-changing substitutions that he did that really turned it around. Brought on Palmer, brought on Watkins, collectively were involved in that goal in the 90th minute, and England won. Did the best team win on the day? I'd say, marginally, well, not even marginally. I'd say England did play better. It wasn't as if the Netherlands were bad, and it was just good to see progressive football on the whole. And now that we've got a Spain against England final, I would be very surprised if both teams retreated and just played cagey football. You just haven't seen that with this Spain team. And if anything, with this generally reactive England team, you'd expect them to hopefully open up and just make it all the more progressive as well for the final. So, who knows what can happen? And with this Spain team in particular as well, that they've got a lot of seasoned heads, but they've got a lot of young talent, like Yamal, 16 years old. I think he turned 17 a day before the final. So for some of those Spanish players, it'll be a new experience as well. Whereas with this England team, you've got those players who've gone to the World Cup and exited the semis in 2018. You've got a lot of those players who also played 3 years ago as well. So, on paper, this is also a very good England team. I had a quick look at the probabilities um, just before recording this video as well, and I think Spain, surprisingly, they're not miles ahead, but they're they're the favourites, albeit with a narrow margin. So it could be a literal 50-50. It just depends if Southgate will learn from his lessons from 3 years ago that if England score, will they just pull up the drawbridge, or are they just going to go out and give it all from start to finish? So it really will depend on what kind of mood Southgate is in and what tactics he's got planned. So onto my Euro Fantasy Matchday 17. The only players I've lost out on from the previous matchday are Hernandez, Mbappe, and Gakpo. Because again, as I've mentioned, I've literally favoured the players who had the highest probabilities of progressing each round in the knockouts, and ultimately Spain and England were among them. And every time I've topped up on those players. So as it stands, I've got 3 gaps that I have to ultimately fill in my own team. But with that said, I think it does also make sense to have a quick reminder of the rules as well, just to contextualize where we're at. So for match day 7, we've got the added benefit that we can pick a maximum of 8 players from each team. Obviously, there's only 2 teams that we can pick from. So anyone who did back England and Spain in the latter stages will be in a good position there. And then in terms of transfers as well, we can see that before the semis, it was 4 transfers, and before the final, it's 5 transfers. So from my point of view, for my own very own team, I'm looking at 3 transfers that I need to make. No hits are needed, and that I would have used all of my chips in the group stages anyway. So I'd literally be down to my transfers. So the transfers that I'll be looking to do, in fact, I'll be actually be making 4 different transfers here. So obviously I'll be filling the void for Mbappe, Gakpo, and Hernandez, but I'm also going to do a switch up as well with my midfield. So I'll start off with the defense first of all, and it's a bit of a maverick pick, but I feel that he's been getting more game time as the tournament progresses, and there were questions about his fitness as well. It's a bit of a differential pick as well, but I'm actually going to go for England's Luke Shaw. So obviously, I know he hasn't started a full match. The X-Mins are a bit of a concern. Surely, it's the final, and it's a tournament fantasy game. If you aren't going to take risks now, when will you take risks? So that's something that I would have as an option. Of course, when it comes to the match day itself, if he well, if he's starting from the bench again, maybe he might be my sub one potentially. But I think he's someone worth considering if you're looking to get a bit of traction. After all, Luke Shaw did score in the last Euros final as well, so that's something that is worth bearing in mind. Again, Maverick pick, but then I look at my defenders as well: Stones, Walker, Gahey. Of course, the downside is this match is not going to finish 0-0. Let's put it that way. So I could have just been boring and just bought another Spanish player. Could have bought a Cucurella, but just picking Luke Shaw as a differential option, and I'd almost certainly start with 3 defenders. One of them would be Carvajal, of course, was suspended during the semi-final. So Carvajal would definitely start for me. And then in terms of ball recoveries, Gahey was an interesting pick. Of course, he was suspended for the quarterfinal and returned for the semi-final. So Gahey would also be a starter for me, possibly alongside Luke Shaw. But if I bottle it, then I'd probably go for Stones or Walker. So the other change that I'm going to make with my hypothetical team is actually get rid of Williams. Now, with him, again, somewhat of a mixed bag in terms of what he has offered, but I'm actually going to go for another Spanish player and just bring him up here. If I can just find him. There he is, Dani Olmo. So with Dani Olmo, I feel that with him, like in terms of attacking prowess for that Spanish team, makes sense. And yeah, just gonna get him in. And of course, I've already got Lamine Yamal. I brought him in to my team very early on when many other Euro fantasy managers were reluctant to buy him because they felt that he was a negative out of position player, wasn't scoring any goals. But of course, he has been assisting regularly throughout the tournament, and of course, got his goal finally off the mark in tournament football with that stunning strike against France. So fairly content with having him. So got again 23 million in the bank. Anyone who's got a limitless chip now kind of feels like it's just wasted purely because money is no object really with the extra funds they've given. I kind of feel with limitless chip probably could have been used in the earlier rounds. So from my side, I've got true transfers left, and again another differential pick, and might even be a slight possibility that he might even start the final for England after his heroics in the semi-finals. I'm going to go for Ollie Watkins. And of course, I know Ollie Watkins has had limited minutes, but then you can see what kind of game-changing effect he had for England, and maybe Watkins would be his pick. And whether Watkins like starts or comes on as a sub, I've got no doubt that he's capable of making an impact. And again, it's tournament football, and a lot of these players aren't even guaranteed minutes. Like, do you just want to pick players who are guaranteed minutes but may not make an impact? Fair enough. I guess that's why we've got all those players for ball recoveries. But there's only so many players you can buy for ball recoveries. After all, we've already got Rodri here, we've already got Gahey here. So I'm not really like fussed too much on X mins for Euro fantasy in particular. Of course I would have been for UCL fantasy and also for FPL as well. But again, I would say that like Shaw is of course more of a differential because again, limited mins, unlikely to get clean sheet. But Ollie Watkins, he could just come on, sub on, with the chance of potentially changing the game with a goal. And of course, that was no fluke. And we've seen the amount of goals and assists that he's contributed to for Aston Villa in the Premier League, which has been rewarded with Villa qualifying for Champions League football for the first time. Of course, they were in the European Cup before the competition format changed. So I think it just makes sense for that added risk. So clearly, with these transfers, with the way that my team has been set up, I really don't need to take risks. But because I feel that there is like upside with Shaw and with Watkins, I'm happy to go for them. And then, of course, I've got Olmo as well. And I feel that he's shown a considerable amount of attacking prowess as well. That leaves me on to my final transfer now. So I've got 8 England players. So by default, I can't pick another England player. So I'm going to go to Spain now. And again, I'm going to counter the X-Mins risks that I've taken with Watkins and Shaw by picking someone who is very likely to start for Spain, and that's Alvaro Morata. But interestingly enough, for those who may or may not have caught it, he actually appeared to have had some sort of like injury or a clash. So there was like a collision after the match against France. I really hope that that isn't an injury setback on a personal level. Of course, I'm an England fan. I want England to have the best chance of winning, but I've not heard of any reports of him being seriously like ruled out. So going to pick him as well purely for the X-Mins. If, of course, reports come out that he's ruled out, then I can flip him out for a Ferran Torres or a Joselu as well. So again, with this hypothetical team, it's just an illustration to show you the mode of direction I could go with this team, and that if this was fully locked in, of course, I'd confirm my transfers like on the day itself after the lineups have been revealed. So in terms of the formation that we're looking at here, if like Morata is a potential starter, I'd probably make a 50-50 call, and I'd probably even just choose Watkins. And if Watkins is definitely a starter over Kane, then brilliant. So makes sense to give him a shot. With the midfield, I'd expect Fabian Ruiz, Saka, Bellingham, Olmo, Rodri to all start. So clearly playing a 5-man midfield there. And then onto the defenders. I've mentioned that Carvajal and Gahey would be like definite starters for me, and then probably take a punt on Luke Shaw as a differential pick. Will he start in the final? There might be a possibility. I just find it remarkable that Southgate even picked him as someone for the Euros squad, having not really played any football since he picked up an injury in Feb. So, like, he's obviously got a bit of game time now, and yeah, if he does start, I would be very shocked if he completes a full match. And it could very well be that if it's 0-0 and that if he's just completely knackered after an hour, could get subbed off and bag a clean sheet if he starts. But I'm not expecting any clean sheets in the final. But I'd probably just take the risk and just go for Luke Shaw just due to differential sake, and also I was going to say his history as a tournament player, but just for a bit of fun, really. And then on to the goalkeepers, Pickford and Simon. I'd pick Pickford purely on the basis that I'd favour Spain to have more shots on target than England. So pick up save points for Pickford, really. And I guess it really brings me on to the next question, the elephant in the room, the final itself. Who is going to win Euro 2024? So again, we know Spain's history. I think that's their 5th Euros final, which I think would be a record for any nation that's competed in the Euros since its inception. And of course, you've got England, who've never won a Euros. So as a fan, I'd want England to win, but on probability's sake, Spain clearly have the edge. But we've also seen that there's been a lot of like tight matches. I honestly believe that it's so close, in fact, this match can more than likely go into extra time and penalties. So oddly enough, in England's sake, I feel that conceding an early goal, as we have seen, benefited them against Netherlands because they just had to just really be more progressive. Whereas in Spain's case, we've just seen them just be so dominant in like literally all their matches at the Euros. They have won every single match, and that is somewhat troubling. Whereas England have only literally won two matches outright, the match against Serbia and the match against the Netherlands, and both matches were very tight as well. The concern I have as an England fan is like the possession side, like Spain, 58% possession against France, and then they played Germany, again, the home team. The possession there actually was almost 50-50, but the fact they were on the heavier side of the draw, knocked out Germany, knocked out France. The Georgia match, again, Spain were the heavy favourite, 75% possession, and Albania, they had a narrow win there, but 59% possession. And then Italy in the group stages, they had 57% possession. And then lastly, Croatia in that opening game, 3-0 win. Surprisingly, Croatia had more possession there. That Spain have been tried and tested in this tournament. You could say that 4 of those teams are teams of the highest pedigree. Croatia, who got to the finals in 2018 at the World Cup, Italy, who won the Euros 3 years ago, Germany, who won the World Cup 10 years ago, and you got France, who won the World Cup 4 years ago. So Spain have been tried and tested. Whereas with England, I kind of feel like, that we've kind of fluked it along the way as well. So we've been very lucky by being on the less stacked side of the draw, and Spain have been on the heavier side of the draw. It is going to be a massive job for England. If England were to win, it would be beyond normal time, extra time, penalties. And oddly enough, I feel that England would be the favourites if it went to penalties, because the fact we've already taken penalties in this tournament and we've come through them as well would give a psychological boost as well. Let me know in the comments below what you think. Is football coming home? Of course it is.